It's good to be home. It's good to be with you guys, and I feel like I'm with family every time I'm with my producers, especially my cotton producers, and I love, beating the drum. I try not to beat my chest. They Mama taught us not to beat her chest, but Dad said it wasn't bragging if it's true. So we are the largest cotton patch, and we are the food, fuel, and fiber capital of the world, and we represent more than food security, as you know. We represent the heart and soul of this country and its values, and that's really what keeps me up at night, but it's what gets me up every day, ready for the fight, to try to make sure that we have the same freedoms and opportunities that y'all have had. For your children and for my children and your grandchildren. And let me tell you something. The battle is red hot. And the other side, and they aren't the enemy, they're our fellow Americans, but their ideology is hostile to our way of life. And I will fight to the last drop of blood and sweat and tears to protect what has made this country great. And it's what's represented in this room. Thank you. And as I often say, and I know you know this, I'm preaching the choir, but it really is about freedom for the people versus control by the government. And the more the government expands and the more we transfer power away from the people and the sovereign states of the United States, the less we are that shiny city on the hill. No other force in all the world except the love of God in Jesus Christ, and I'm the chief of sinners. No other force save and accept Jesus has been more powerful than freedom-loving people in a free society. Just freedom empowers and unleashes God's greatest potential for all men created in His image. And when you snuff that light out, and when you snuff that out, or you transfer that out to the government, you're taking away the heart and soul of this experiment in liberty and democracy. And it's not that just our citizens need a strong America, the world needs a strong America. I mean, Ronald Reagan said we're the last best hope of mankind. I think he's right, and that's why, again, that's why it's a labor of love for me to get up and do everything we do and what you do in partnership with me every day for our country. We have a tough slog for the next couple years. We're going to have to do things. It's a new era. And politics have and policies have consequences. There are a lot of folk that don't like President Trump, and quite frankly, there were times I didn't like the way he spoke or the way he acted, but I love what he did for this country, and I loved his courage, and I loved that he stood up and he fought for us and he followed through on his commitments. I mean, that alone, just a politician that would follow through on what he said he'd do is worth everything, all my respect. But we got a new sheriff in town, and they don't believe like we believe out here on most things. And we got to have all those freedoms that we talk about, but freedom to farm and harvest our resources and steward them is going to be important going forward more than ever to articulate that and to defend that. We had some good runs. I've been, this is my third term. It's hard to believe 4 years, Steve, into this, but we've had a good run. We've done some good things. Let's not forget that. So before I depress, and I'm not here to depress you, I hope I'm here to fire you up. I was just on a call. That's why I came in late, trying to secure a lot of money so that we can take that 5-seat margin and we can take that gavel away from Nancy Pelosi and we can stop some of this nonsense. Okay? And I've been asked to do that, and look, it takes some time away from other things, and I'm traveling to other places besides Idalou and Seminole and Muleshoe and my hometown of Plainview. But they think enough of us that they asked us to be a leader and take a third of the country and try to get the House back into Republican control. And I said, yes, sir, I'll do it. I believe in that one. So thanks for letting me do that, because it takes time. But I also think it gives us more influence, Steve. I really do. They asked us for the second time to be deputy chair of the NRCC. And whether it's those things or it's Richie Neal as a Democrat asking us to chair rural health care for the country, I think it's a tremendous honor. I hope it's because they know that when we do something in West Texas, we do it all the way. And we always aim to exceed expectations. I hope it's that, like Trump, they believe when we say we're going to do something, we do it. I hope it's because they know when we say we'll fight, we'll be the one that's the last standing, still fighting. I hope they also believe it's because we're also willing to work with anybody that we can find common ground with, and that we're not up there to tear anybody down. I'm just not. I said that from the outset. I don't think I've gone back on that. I stomp my feet and I breathe fire on the House floor, but I'm the first guy. The other day I walked up after I was breathing fire on the border issue, and it's really kind of an awkward dynamic because there really aren't many people in the House. But you got the guy behind the speaker's chair, and he's a Democrat because the Democrats are in power, so they occupy the chair. And I'm talking to him, and I'm yelling. I'm like, man, I can't believe it. And it's all coming from my gut or in my heart, but I'm aiming it all at this poor fella that's in the chair. So I come up after the deal. I had an hour with my colleagues on the border, and I walked up the side and I said, hey, Jodey Arrington, West Texas, this was not personal, and it wasn't aimed all at you. But your members in your party, and he said, no, I appreciate you doing it. Anyway, he tracked me down, found me, and said, that's the first person ever did that to me. He said, can we have a meeting, and can we just talk about something that maybe we can work on together? I've never met the guy. This is one of the few Democrats I've never met. We went to see Henry Bonilla. We did see Henry Bonilla, too. He was down there at the border. He was there at Carrizo Springs. But Henry Cuellar, I said, Henry, we just passed one of the biggest pieces of reform legislation to save rural hospitals. It's called the step-down model as opposed to the stepped-up in basis that we'll talk about. But it's a big, big deal. And if we don't provide basic care in rural communities, if we don't have sustainable critical infrastructure in rural communities, the next generation farmer and rancher are not going to stay and risk all that they have to do to make it work. So it's not just a farm bill, it's everything that affects the rural community and families living in rural areas. Well, Henry Cuellar, Henry Bonilla, Henry Cuellar, the Henrys. Henry Cuellar and I worked together to pass that bill. We passed 5 pieces of legislation, bipartisan, whether it was lowering drug cost or better serving our veterans or rural hospitals and rural health care. I passed more legislation on your behalf in a Democrat-controlled House than I did when we had the majority. So I guess what I'm saying is, oh, and by the way, when we were at the border, I invited Henry Cuellar to speak to our group. And I said, we're not going to shame you. We're not going to put you out there. We're not going to tell the press. We're just going to have a quiet breakfast. We want to hear from you. Steve, those things go a long way. And so while you're fighting the fight and swinging the sword, you got to be willing to get in the ditch and dig with your partners. And you know what? Who's my partner? It's kind of like, was it Martin Luther King said, who's your neighbor? You know, anybody in need? Who's my partner? Anybody willing to do something I think is going to be good for my country. I don't really care who it is. AOC, Ilhan Omar. They were elected by the people of this country in their district. I oppose just about everything they stand for, but I'm going to work with them if they'll help me on rural health care. I'm going to work with me if they can get us a farm bill. If we can get WHIP and finish out 2020 and get to that farm bill where we can work on fixing the structural programs for drought, then I'm going to work with them. They may cancel me, but we're going to work with them because we're going to lead by example. So farm bills, trade deals, man, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Got to keep the pressure on China. We led a letter with 35 members of Congress, and we've asked for Catherine Tai, our new U.S. trade rep, and Bill Sack to have a meeting so we can go through a list of things from WHIP to China, which is, I know, a huge, huge part of our this industry, and it's our largest market. So we're just trying to line everything up and knock it down, just like we said, Title I cotton, USMCA, China. Now I give Trump credit for the trade deals more than any single person, but and we said rural health, free markets, fair trade, a good farm bill, and sustainable infrastructure for rural communities. I think we knocked things down on every one of them, but let's reload and let's go after it. And there'll be a lot of resistance and fighting with the flood of foolish policies like the Green New disaster, and then there'll be some opportunities. Let's just keep our heads on a swivel, and just like the coach told you, and I lose, stay on your toes, heads on a swivel, and let's be ready to get in the fight. Let me let you guys guide this conversation, lest I stood up here and Ken Hance used to say when I would talk like this, he'd say, "How's your shoulder, Jodey?" And I said, "What do you mean my shoulder?" He'd say, "Well, you were patting yourself on the back so much, I figured you probably tore a rotator cuff reaching way back there like that." But look, yeah, Hance ought to know. He's had 2 rotator cuff surgeries on. He's had a full shoulder replacement on both. Hey, here's the thing. Y'all elected me. I'm ready to come home when you're ready for me to come home. I'm not enamored with it. I'm not in love with it. We moved our family back here. We're as happy as we've ever been with my kids back in a school that says the Pledge of Allegiance and acknowledges we're one nation under God. Come on. You know? So, but I still wake up with the joy of the Lord and the fire in my belly. And y'all have helped me get to where we've gotten every step of the way. You even trusted me when I said I'm going on the Ways and Means. As the one stinking thing I told y'all, I'm going to be on the farm ag committee, and I hate it because that is the one thing that I've changed. But I did it with you, and we talked about it, and I can promise you this, in looking back after 2 years, 1 term, and now my second, it was the best decision, one of the best decisions I've made. And I got more of an audience with Trump and the administration. I have more influence in my conference, and it is the best thing we could do. Now, you want to talk about step up and basis being repealed, the estate tax, death tax going up, exemptions going down, and having a unrealized value of your capital gains. They're not going to ask anybody on the ag committee how they feel about that. They're going to ask the pro-ag, pro-freedom-loving people like me and Adrian Smith and Jason Smith from Missouri, who claims that they have a little cotton up there too. And we're going to be on the front lines now, fighting the fight on this big tax hike that's coming through. Not only are we going to be back to the #1 spot, you remember, you look in the camera and, you score the touchdown, #1, Mom, love you, Mom, #1. Well, we're #1 again. If they pass this business tax hike, we'll be the highest taxed economy in the free world. Communist China has a lower tax rate. That's their answer to one of the worst recessions and biggest lifts in recovering from the economic disaster of this pandemic. That's their answer. So, but for us, it's about selling the farm. Literally, it's about just selling the farm in West Texas, because there's just very few families that will have the cash position to pay that kind of tax hike. So we're going to be going after them good on this one, and I'm going to need your help. Okay, I'll be quiet. Y'all ask me questions. Talk about election integrity, censorship, farm bills, whip, trade, tax, Idalou football, whatever you want to talk about. Thank you for your support. Thanks for having me this morning. Thanks for letting me rant.
Jody,
Speaking of ranting.
Yeah. One thing I've seen, you mentioned about the corporate tax rate, then I see that Janet Yellen is trying to encourage some kind of base corporate tax rate for the rest of the world. So maybe we won't look so bad.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let us reduce our competitiveness, hamstring the home team as we compete globally. But wait a minute, that might put us at a disadvantage, and the jobs inversions, the companies, the capital, and the jobs that go with them might go back overseas. We had $6 trillion in business investment after Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. $6 trillion. $1 trillion in capital came overseas. We had more jobs than we had people, all you know all the metrics. And their answer in a recovery that we're in today, which is epic, is to do just that. And we'll take care of that disadvantage. We'll ask all the rest of the world, because we're Americans. We'll just ask them, y'all raise your tax rates too so we can have an even playing field. That's not how it works. So yeah, it just keeps getting worse. You can't make this stuff up, Steve. We'll have 9%. We will have a 9% higher rate than the average OECD country, so developed country. We have the highest the estate tax already, the death tax, which is an unfair, un-American tax, but as a tax code provision, it's the highest rate in our tax code already, 4th in the world. But they don't care. They're coming for it because they want that money to be used for infrastructure. Sean, I hardly recognize you. You just keep getting skinnier and skinnier. Your wife says prettier and prettier. Well, so anyway, I don't want to get too far off on the tax deal, but that's the big thing. Infrastructure for me means roads and bridges in a system, a seamless and efficient system to move product and people. I have some opinions about states' role in that. I have opinions about how we should pay for it, but the first question you got to ask is, what the heck is infrastructure? Well, to them, it's 500,000 charging stations for their electric vehicles. They're going to spend $115 billion out of the $2.3 trillion on roads and bridges. They'll spend $174 billion on electric vehicles and charging stations. And that isn't the worst. I hadn't gotten to the worst part. So I know we want to talk about WHIP, and we should, and let's talk about any of it. But as a good friend of mine, Walt Haygood, said yesterday, or the day before yesterday, what good is a farm bill if we lose our country? And you can lose your country a lot of ways. And you've heard me talk about the debt, $30 trillion in debt, $225,000 per household. Interest now is almost at $500 billion. We'll spend more on just the interest than on national defense, which is $750 billion in less than 10 years. Social Security is insolvent. Medicare trust fund's insolvent. Every trust fund I know is pretty much insolvent in the next 10 years, the big ones. We don't even talk about that because we don't really want you to know, and we don't want to scare you. The union pension bailout, that was $100 billion of a $600 billion problem. We don't even factor that in, or what we owe ourselves. So it's far worse than you can imagine. And when you do these things, you're asked all the time, what keeps you up at night? What are the biggest threats to our country? Well, I still think the biggest threat to the country is our national debt. And I still think that that's one that when it happens, you can't bail yourself out of. And I still think that when we have a sovereign debt crisis, because there is no political will on either side to fix it, even though I have the only bipartisan debt commission or committee caucus with 30 Democrats and 30 Republicans. We did that. Nobody told us we couldn't do it, so we did it. And we're going to keep doing it, and we're going to make every effort because our kids' future's at stake. But the first people they're cutting, Steve, is the first people they're cutting are these people in this room. The programs that allow us to have a stable ag economy, allow us to be competitive in a world that ain't fair, especially with China, but many others, and this would be the first thing on the chopping block. It's hard enough to fight for crop insurance and explain the safety net today to Republicans, to some Republicans, not all of them. Okay, I'll be quiet. Steve just always brings out he gets me fired up. I look at him and I just start getting mad at everything going on. And he said his wife feels the same way. Steve is a warrior. He's no BS guy. He hadn't been since I worked with him and from the campaign till now. He never pulls punches. He's just like a good West Texan, he's very straightforward, and he's always informed and substantive, but he's also very balanced, because I have farmers coming at me from every side on everything. And at some point I have to say, I can't go after 100 things. What are the 3 things that we got to go after today? That's just the reality of this world we live in and the world that I'm trying to work in. Steve, I can't thank you enough. What a great partnership. And a great friendship that's developed over the years. And I'd say the same about Cody. And except that I'm still mad at him. The reason I don't recognize him as much is because he took one of our best members of my team away from me to marry her and have a family. And I just think that's selfish, Cody. I don't know. I mean, we're talking about saving the country here and making sacrifices. And anyway, I can hardly go there. And other questions, comments about? Yes, sir. It was disheartening, to say the least. The trip to the border, we led a delegation, and I keep saying we led because I want you to understand there's voting and there's leading, and everybody's got to vote, but not everybody leads. And we led that trip with 13 members of the Texas delegation, and look, it's the best example of what I said earlier. Policies have consequences, and there's not a clearer picture and more bold display that than the border and the Biden administration's reckless policies. And it is epic. It is unmitigated. And I don't know that it will get any better anytime soon, because when you send the message that you welcome anyone to come to this country to cross our sovereign border illegally, and that you will not be held accountable but caught and released, that you will not be deported and detained, but you will be rewarded with a path to citizenship and amnesty, this is what you're going to get. Now, do I think we've got a deal practically with the folks who are here, especially DACA? Yes, I do. Have I already voted on legislation that would give some legal status and peace of mind to the DACA recipients? Yes, I have. Have I voted on the guest worker fixes because H-2A doesn't work? Yes, I have. So and do I welcome the immigrant? Every freedom-loving, God-fearing man or woman from all over the world who is hungry for opportunities and sees the shining light, the city of the shining city on the hill, and wants to make America their home. But they must respect our sovereignty. They must respect our laws, and they must respect the safety of our citizens first. And then we need to make sure that we have people here that share our values and will pledge an allegiance to our country and to our way of life. Is that too much to ask? I don't think so. So I welcome the immigrant. It's a land of immigrant. You waving at me, you tell me 5 minutes. Hey. Hi, Lindley. How you doing? She's a lady bulldog. So, yeah, I mean, in the worst of it is, a lot of people that say Trump was inhumane because he was deporting people who had due process, found to be here without a legal claim or legitimate asylum, and he deported them. If you don't enforce the laws, nobody's going to take you seriously. But they call that inhumane. And when we're at a place as a country where it's inhumane to enforce the laws, you have the chaos that we have at the border that's burning hot at the border. The worst part is, those people that think it's inhumane, they have not looked into the faces of the families that I looked at that have crossed the border, who were completely abused and exploited to get here. And the drug cartels are in complete control of the border. Absolutely, they know our laws better than we know them, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. Because while they got our security forces in the CBP and other law enforcement processing families and taking care of children like social workers and providing that service, there are gaping security holes. And I read where drug overdoses, we're talking about guns, 20,000 a year, people killed in gun-related incidents. 84,000 in the last several months, people have died of a drug overdose. 38% increase in opioids. Fentanyl is the key driver of the opioid crisis epidemic. 38%, 100% is coming from across the border. And do you know, while our guys are off their task of their security mission, the drug cartels are pushing more product than we've ever seen to destroy our neighborhoods and get our kids hooked. That's what's happening. I need to end on another, I got 2 minutes, 1 minute. Any other question? Thanks for asking that. It's a disaster, a disaster. Yes, Sean?
As this climate legislation starts manifesting the
Green New.
inevitable that we do some, and especially some reconciliation where they can blow it. Anything they add on or attach, of course, is going to be a problem with it. That some of the, I appreciate some of the tone we've had this day about trying to visit with Democrats about things, because it's going to be imperative that we are able to participate in anything if we're going to have anything functional in climate change attached to something that we have to deal with. It actually is something that might have the potential to be paid for
Yes.
on the farm level.
Yes.
It's a involuntary mandate to keep you in government that already exists is a train wreck.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways that this could happen where it could hurt us, and you that it could happen where it wouldn't be as big a deal. That's just, it's more of a comment than a question, but I think it's going to be imperative that you continue to teach your colleagues on the Republican side.
Yes.
This is a big deal. But finding avenues to visit with our friends across the aisle is going to be very important.
It's hugely important. I am co-chair, and I say these things so you know that I'm not just breathing fire, but I co-chair with Henry Cuellar and Lou Correa from the Orange County, California. It's an energy trade caucus, and it really was created to get some Democrats in, give them a platform so we could speak it with one voice to the devastation that would incur if we just killed fossil fuels, conventional, oil and gas. And we've got the carbon bank issue with CCC and Vilsack. I think he's the best of the choices on the Democrat side. We can work with him, but we've got to work with the Cuellars and the Vicentes and the Jimmy Panettas, and we're doing. I'm working on a bill with Jimmy Panetta right now. So I am strategically not just running around singing with the choir of the Republicans, engaging these folks where they can be engaged and meeting them where they can be met, and we're carving out that common ground where we can. Even term limits, and I'm a big term limits guy. There's another bipartisan guy I'm co-chairing with, Ro Khanna. He may not know anything about agriculture, but we have an audience with him. So we just gotta work harder, And I told people who elected me in this last cycle, I said, if I can't be as effective in the minority, and if I can't find common ground and pass legislation where it's needed, or fend off, for heaven's sakes, if I can't do that, then you need to find somebody else. You just need to. If you have to have the majority to be a leader and to get anything done, you're in the wrong business, and I'm the wrong guy. And I said, we passed 5 pieces of legislation, and I plan on doing more of that. Are we in a bad spot right now, Sean? Really bad. Is it being rammed and jammed pretty good? Real good. Is it partisan and hyper-partisan like you'd never seen before? Like I've never seen before on all these big pieces of legislation? Will it calm down? Will it temper? Will it reset? And will we get back to governing? Yeah, I think we will. Will the damage be irreparable? I think there'll be lots of damage. Last point, 5-seat margin. We're getting the House back. Senate's harder. We got 4 years to suffer through some of this. No disrespect personally, but to suffer through these policies. I think our best days are ahead of us. I still believe that. I was on a call earlier, and I said, remember George W. Bush said that guy in El Paso that lived on the sunrise side of the mountain? We have the most diverse class of Republican GOP members of the United States Congress than we've ever had. And you say, I didn't know you were going to talk about diversity. I didn't think you're a big diversity guy. Not for diversity's sake, but the fact is America is a diverse country. It's a strength. It's not a weakness. It's only a weakness when all you talk about is identity politics to divide the country. But diversity is our strength. We got people from all over who come here generally for that freedom that we talked about earlier. Now, I don't know where they're going to go when we turn this country into Venezuela, but for now they're still coming, and they're willing to die in the desert. And if they'll come the legal way, they're some of the best Americans. We got some Americans that won't engage, that are takers and not contributors. We got more Americans now hooked on the entitlement culture and trapped in government dependence. Some of the best Americans I know are people who are first, second, third generation. I called a gal the other day, 3 days ago, 3 days ago. It's all running together. And she worked at Happy State Bank, and she became an American citizen. Nothing brought more joy to my heart and tears to my eyes, Lindley was with me, than to congratulate a new American. That new blood is critical for our success. Those folks who come here, Maria Salazar, new Republican. Mario, the former Miami mayor, Cuban, new Republican member. Native American Yvette Harrell from New Mexico, Iranian, what's her name? Not Nancy Mace. Anyway, up in Oklahoma, our former NFL football player, African American from Utah, another African American. I'm telling you, we didn't lose a single Republican seat from sea to shining sea. We flipped 15. We got a 5-seat margin, and we've got messengers that look like America, but are carrying the message of the values that are bedrock here in West Texas. And I get to be a small part of that. Thanks to you for putting me in this position for the time that I'm here while God has me called to this job for such a time as this. Sean, thank you. Steve, thank you. Cody, thank you. Y'all keep working hard. Y'all, my number is 806-317-2683, 806-317-2683. I haven't changed my number since I moved back to Lubbock to work for Ken Hance from George W. Bush, and I won't change it. And if you really need to talk to me, call me. If you need something, text me. Now, I got a few of you guys that won't stop texting me. I'm going to ask you to stop texting me now. And Steve knows exactly who they are. No. Love you guys. I appreciate you. Keep praying for the country. Go West Texas.